Welcome to the Buying Legal Counsel Legal Procurement Best Practices webinar, Improving the Procurement Process Using Lean. Our expert is Lourdes Slater from Carta Legal. Good morning, Lourdes. Thank you for being here today.
Good morning, Sylvia. Thank you for having me and for that introduction. I am very excited to talk to all of you about one of my favorite topics, which is Lean Six Sigma. And I want to first of all, acknowledge that we are all living unprecedented times. And I know that it's challenging both at home and at work to be able to completely do our work remotely. For that and for many other reasons, I also think that refreshing our recollection of what we may have learned in our Lean Six Sigma classes may be helpful. So let me start with getting a sense of what the audience knows about Lean. First of all, we have a little poll here, just a few questions. Do you have a Lean Six Sigma belt? Is the first question. And the second question, do you apply what you may have learned in the past about Lean in your legal services procurement processes?
So for those of you who are dialed in, the voting is in progress. If you have a chance to log in, please do so. I'll let it open for another moment before we close the poll. I'm going to end the poll now. And I will share the results here.
Great. So this is interesting. 88% say no to having a Lean Six Sigma or Six Sigma belt. Do you apply Lean tools? 56% say no, 7% say yes, so that's pretty good. Two other questions and then we're off to the races. Do you feel that you spend too much time on non-value add activities in your day-to-day job? And the second question that I have, and you'll understand a little bit later why I'm asking this question, do you ask your suppliers what they want out of the deal straight out of the gate? Meaning, is that one of your top considerations when you are engaging into your procurement process with your suppliers? Are you really trying to find out what they want out of the deal?
Again, for those of you who are dialed in but can't see the screen, so we have the two questions up and 62% of you already voted. So if you haven't voted, but you see it in front of you, if you could just share your opinions or your thoughts. Okay, a couple more people voted, so I will end the poll now and share the results.
Okay, so this is very interesting. Do you feel you spend too much time on non-value add activities? 80% of you say yes. And as to the other question, do you inquire from your suppliers about what they really want? 75% said no. So this is the gist of what I want to discuss with you, and we'll take questions later, and you can always email me questions. But my, both through surveys like this one and my conversations with many of you in procurement, I've come to realize that between 75 and 90% of you feel that you spend a lot of your time in non-value add activities. And what the Lean methodology is meant to address is exactly that, is removing those non-value added activities from your chain of work. So Lean is really very applicable to exactly what you do. And when we think about this, the first thing you wonder is like, why? Why do we spend and why are our professionals that do this work spend so much time in non-value added activities? It's not because they're not smart, it's not because they're not educated, but it's because the structure of the workflow is wrong. Some people, when they get to this role, have no experience. That's also an issue. And the training is not particularly geared towards removing waste from processes. So what I want to talk about is a few techniques that will help you cut the cycle time to take purchasing to a better place. First of all, in this presentation, we're going to be addressing some of the basics of lean. And even though I am a lean evangelist, I really don't think that a deep understanding of lean methodology is required. I think of lean tools as just that, tools that you can have in your chest of tools that you can select which ones are needed for particular pain points, pressure points, challenges that you're facing. So we're going to talk about how to take cost out of the supply chain. We're going to talk about how to reduce terms and conditions, excursions, what I call excursions, like going back to the contract over and over again. We're going to talk about win-win. We all know what that is. But when I first started doing this, I realized that everything I have always been taught about win-win was wrong. It's not cutting the pie chart in half. It's so much more than that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we're also going to talk about cost modeling and benchmarking for success. So before we get into the nitty-gritty part of the conversation, let's go through some of these lean tools. The whole goal of lean, and you may remember this, and it really speaks to a lot of what common sense dictates, is to add value by increasing flow of your process. So making your process faster and quicker. And the way that you do that is by reducing waste. So really the definition of lean and the goals of lean mirror exactly what the goals of procurement should be. So what do we do in our day-to-day activities? So these are the three things that we always do, no matter how great we are with our processes. We do activities that add value and contribute to the satisfaction of our clients. We do a lot of activities that do not add value and don't contribute to either the satisfaction of the customers or to profitability. And we also do what we call non-value add activities that have to be done, but that are not necessarily contributing to satisfaction or profits. In that bucket, I place compliance, complying with GDPR, the CCPA, all kinds of training that we need to do. There's many things that are part of what our jobs entail that even though at no value, they're necessary. So what we need to think about really is how to take out the non-value add activities that are in the middle of this slide. That's the focus. How do we make our work flow better by reducing this non-value add activities, which is what in lean we call waste. So there's a few tools that I'm going to briefly talk about. One of the tools that we can use in lean procurement are the 5 S's. So is sorting what those non-value added activities are, put them in order of which ones you want to tackle first and eliminate first. You need to figure out how to shine, which really means how to really go about doing that. You have to then standardize the way that you have done the removal of the waste, and then you have to sustain that process. So it's not, you tackle one problem one day using this methodology, and then you forget about it. The 5 S's is sort of like a culture of lean, and lean is really more of a culture thing. than anything else, is a new way of thinking about your day-to-day activities and removing waste through this methodology. So we all hear all the time that what everyone wants is to add value. We want to ask from our clients what is valuable to you, and we want to bring to the table value. So value really is any task or service that the client is, I should add, happily willing to pay for, and everything else is waste. And again, some of the waste is necessary, like training and compliance programs. So value is the core concept of lean, and really of anything that we do, both in our personal lives and in our professional lives. We want to add value. That is what it's our true goal. So what is waste then? Lean has this acronym called Downtime, and that is the definition of waste under the lean methodology. And downtime stands for defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilizing talent that you may already have, transportation, inventory excess, motion waste, and excess processing. And just by very briefly glancing at this, you can probably start thinking of all of the different tasks that you have that may contain one or more of these types of waste. And that's really sort of the analysis that goes into when you are trying to reframe your work into a lean framework. The analysis that you have to do is you have to look at a particular process and deconstruct that process and build it back again, reducing the waste. It sounds simple, and it is simple. The only issue is that it's time consuming, and it requires attention that we may not think we have time to dedicate to this. But ultimately, and I think a lot of studies have been done about this, ultimately, if we were to spend 20% of our time thinking about the process itself before we engage and go down a rabbit hole, we would make that process 80% more efficient and 80% more effective. So what I'm trying to emphasize, and what I want you to take away, is that I'm not asking you to do any more work than what you're already doing. I'm asking you to do your work, or think of your work, a little bit differently. So let's think about some of these types of waste and how they may surface in your day-to-day work. So defects, that may be you have contracts with missing or inaccurate scope and or terms and conditions. You may get supplier errors and quality issues. There are many others. Over processing, you may be getting more than what you need, or you may be asking for too many unnecessary approvals. So your approval chain may need to be re-looked at and reassessed and reevaluated. You may be conducting a lot of non-strategic sourcing events. I do think that in many ways, the pandemic and our new norm and the way that the world will be after this will be a great sort of opportunity to really reevaluate a lot of what we did before that we thought in our heads, why are we doing this if it's a waste? So conducting non-strategic sourcing events may be one of those. You may spend time drafting reports that are not read or used by anyone, but it's part of what your job description is, and you may not be questioning why this is, you need to do this. So you may be doing extra work that is not necessary. Waiting is a huge waste in procurement. There are a lot of delays that are caused by all kinds of issues, including waiting for legal to come back to you, waiting for your suppliers to send you the contracts, waiting for information that you're getting ad hoc. You may have all different kinds of waiting types of waste in your day-to-day activity. You may have talent that you're not utilizing the right way. And that is, you know, it happens to all of us in our day-to-day. We may have really smart people that are not being asked to do, you know, many different tasks. And you may be piling a whole bunch of work on someone that is over busy and can never get the work done because they are just being given too much work. So staffing is a big issue that has to be addressed with lean processes or with any other process, but lean is a way that you can deconstruct and be able to talk to management and internally with your team about how you go about doing this. And then the time of downtime, the acronym stands for T is time, spending too much time handling or transporting information. Inventory, you may have too many open contracts, you may have too many bidders, you may be dealing with too many suppliers. Motion, unnecessary meetings, unnecessary terms and conditions, excursions, meaning you have a contract that you think is a good one and you keep, you know, reevaluating or renegotiating different terms and conditions and having to go back to legal, which is where contracts sometimes go to die. And all of these things are types of motion that are wasteful. So figuring out a way to remove this waste, it's a great exercise. Extra processing, some of these really overlap, but extra processing can be defined as getting or requiring more approvals and reviews that are actually needed. You know, complex contract language that delays the execution, etc. So that's how I think of approaching procurement in general with lean. And then lean has a lot of tools that you can use. A Kaizen event, for example, Kaizen stands for continuous process improvement. And the goal of a Kaizen event is really to get a cross-functional team of people in a room together for anywhere between 3 days, 5 days, 8 days, depending on the complexity. Most of the ones that I have done are only 3 days. And these sort of exercises are very helpful because you bring not only your procurement team, but you bring also your internal client, and you may bring as well the supplier or suppliers that are at issue for a particular deal that you want to make, and you go through this whole process mapping exercise. Within everything that we do in lean, and when you are taught lean, especially in America, one of the things that we forget to talk about is respect for people, which is sort of like a Japanese concept. And let me just backtrack a little bit. So the lean methodologies really were ironed out with the Toyota manufacturing plant. It's called the Toyota Production Systems. And what the Japanese did is they took on some of the work that had already been done by Americans back, you know, when World War II was happening, because Americans wanted to improve and increase manufacturing speed. And a lot of those concepts were brought into Japan for the restructure and the rebuild after the war. And they used those tools and they sort of went a little bit deeper into what the Americans had done. And one of the great things that they talked about in Japan and they incorporated into the process is respect for people, which really means for the manager or the leader or the product owner or the project owner to put yourself in the position of everyone else in your chain. So for the manufacturing of cars, it was for the manager to actually be at the assembly line. It's what is called Gemba. You go in and you see what your day-to-day looks like for your employee, and you start realizing all of the things that they're doing wrong or not doing or doing in excess. And also to sort of take that back and think about whether the process is respecting the people's ability, time, etc. So my question at the beginning of this session, when I poll that issue of whether you're asking your suppliers what they want to get out of the deal, take some of this into account, because I think when you ask your supplier what they want to take out of the deal, you may be very surprised that it's not more money. It could be many other things. And those are the types of things that you need to get at. And maybe we'll have time to talk a little bit about this later. But one of the things that I'm always surprised about is how we think it's all about money or price. Meanwhile, your supplier, your vendor, your law firm that wants to get into a panel, your new e-discovery vendor that really wants the business, what they may want is, good referrals or testimonials, or being paid not within 45 days, but within 10 days. There may be things that you can work out where you can do a real win-win that is not just compromising with the price, because you're actually getting to know, to really have a great relationship with your supplier, to know, trust you, and like you. And by approaching these negotiations with not just this is what I want for me, but what is it that you want for you? We may go a long way in gaining a lot of advantages ultimately, and even better pricing, better terms for ourselves. So that's one of the things that when lean instructors talk about, they sometimes do not emphasize, but in my book is one of the things that we do need to emphasize. So this is sort of like the four things I wanted to really get into if we have time. And I am going a little bit fast because I know that we want to leave questions to the end. So I apologize for that. But again, just email me if you have any questions. So taking cost out of the supply chain. The traditional techniques that we all use to do this, and we will continue to use, what those are. We do supply-based reduction. We do commodity and category management. We have specialists that really know this particular contracts. We use contract management tools. We have been taught, negotiation strategy, cost methodologies, benchmarking through RFPs, etc. And that is all great, and we need to do that. But we have to take that to the next level, and we can use lean to do that. And the way that you think about how do you do that is by sort of figuring out what your entire supply chain looks like. And when you think about it, very simply put, you have, the suppliers, maybe the suppliers. You have you in the middle, you have your customer, and then you have your customer's customer. So a lot of times we think about this cutting cost out, you think about your relationship with your supplier, but you don't necessarily think about your relationship with your internal customers. So by using Kaizen or the 5 whys methodology, which is really asking your internal customers, why do you need this? And really asking why a few times so that you really get to the bottom of it. You start thinking about taking cost out of the supply chain in a broader terms, not just you and the supplier, but figuring out with your internal customers what it is that they're asking you to get that they may not really need. Um, and it's one of those things that really needs to be done. Sometimes it's done, but sometimes it's not done deeply enough, and the inquiry that needs to take place doesn't really happen as well as it should. So it's something that I just wanted to highlight, that taking cost out of the supply chain is not just a one-way street, just you and the supplier, is also you and your internal customer. The other thing that I think we should talk about when we talk about taking costs out of the supply chain is that arrogance, or thinking that we know everything, is a big enemy of procurement, because when you think about it, your supplier knows more about the industry than you may know, because they have other customers like yourselves. So they may be seeing other customers asking for things that are more beneficial. And if you're not asking for them because you don't know about them, then you're not even getting to know what other people are asking. So this also goes back to that relationship that you want to form with your supplier. I've in my business, I've used many vendors for e-discovery, for underwriting, reappraising properties, for many things. And most of those relationships I now call preferred vendor relationships. But in all of them, I have always wanted to be surrounded by suppliers that know the business well, and for them to tell me what that business should look like, and what I should be asking for. I always tell them that they are not selling me a service or a product. What their job is to make me successful, to make me look good. So that is one of the things that I really have been grateful that I've done, because I have learned so much and I have gotten so many good contracts because I expanded that conversation to more than just, fill out an RFP. And talking about RFPs very briefly, when you send a request for proposal, you sort of know what you want to ask for, right? Assuming that you have gone through your analysis with your internal customer and you're really sure that these are the things you need. So that's what you want to ask, right? But I always want to ask for two other things. I want them to tell me exactly what I'm asking you for and how much that's going to cost. I want you, supplier, to tell me what should I have asked for. And thirdly, I want you, supplier, to tell me why should I not have asked for, in your view. And I emphasize that I will give great weight to innovation when I receive the responses. So in this way, you are sort of opening up your information and your ability to obtain information from the vendor, law firm, supplier, SaaS developer, anywhere, anyone you can think of, because you're asking them to tell you things you may not have thought about. So I think that's, if you do that, you'll be surprised about how much insight you can get. And if you don't ask, you will not get that information, because the customer is always right. So if you're asking, for X, Y, and Z, they will tell you X, Y, and Z. So sometimes the way that we craft our RFPs discourage that behavior. The second thing, preventing contract excursions, and I could be talking about any of these for a day. So again, apologies for going fast. So preventing contract excursions is sort of that point that I made earlier about taking more time at the beginning of the process to really create the best contract that you can create. And it requires doing your work a little bit differently, I think. It requires you to spend more time upfront so that you can save more time later, but it will cut the cycle time. I think most of you probably do this already. Most of you probably, with an RFP, et cetera, you give your terms and conditions upfront. But one of the things that I like to recommend doing, and it's like a lean technique, is you also probably send a supplier selection grading matrix, right? And you tell them that this is, these are the things that are important to you, and this is how you're going to evaluate them. But what about including as part of those categories, the number of requests to the contract that you're sending, and telling them that you're going to give a high number to that. So one of the things that you want is for them not to make all kinds of changes to your contract. And you're going to also be evaluating that as part of your grading matrix. So what that does is it really puts the burden on them to really ask for changes that are so important to them that they are willing to lose the business. And if it's so important, then it is something that you really want to pay attention to. So you have your contract that you think works after talking to your internal client, et cetera. You don't want this contract to change. And you tell them, if you're going to make any changes, we are going to count those changes as part of this grading matrix. And when I have done that, the changes that come back are either non-existent or they're really important things that they were wrong in the contract to begin with, and I really need to pay attention to. So I think that really reduces changes, which really saves time, because then your contract doesn't have to go back to legal and wait for legal to make changes to it. And the other thing that I want to emphasize is that we may think that we've done this contract in the past and that we can just send it. But it's not that every supplier is a snowflake, but every deal is slightly different. So you really need to spend some time looking at what custom clauses each contract needs to include. One of the things that I find, and by doing that, you reduce waste because you reduce the cycle time. And one of the things that I typically don't find in contracts are good exit strategies or ways to address upgrades in software contracts. And right now, everything is changing so rapidly with AI that even when you purchase a particular tech solution, you may be purchasing something that will be upgraded 6 months down the road, and you don't even know about that. So all of those things need to be really thought about. And lean methodologies and lean tools and questions and grading matrices help you sort of frame how you do all of this. So benchmarking, it's another one that I sort of, we probably all do. And there's some, benchmarking techniques that we use, the RFPs, et cetera. There's also the modeling approach of, I only have X amount of money, and this is how much I can tell the supplier I can spend on this. And the supplier would probably tell you, well, I can't do that. And then using, by forming that type of relationship that I was talking about with your supplier before in a pre-negotiation meeting, which I always advise to have before entering into any negotiation, have a sort of meet and greet and get to know your supplier better. That's where you ask those questions of, what do you want to get out of the deal? And they'll say, oh, just a great relationship, blah, 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 blah. But no, drill down on really what are things that are important to you so that we can see what high value concessions we can make with each other. So the must cost is like, this is how much money I have. That is a great technique to use if you really only have X amount of money. Even if they tell you they can't do that, ask them to go back to whoever they need to talk to and come back to you in 48 hours. And you'll be surprised. A lot of times there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of innovation and creativity come along with that. The should cost, this is how much it should cost, is a very painful exercise. I don't recommend that technique unless there's only one or two suppliers that are available to do what you want, and you have time to go through that, you know, painful process of figuring out what truly something should cost. Benchmarking is the easiest one, except in law, we get into this issue that when we're looking for law firm panels, even though our legal department, you know, may be persuaded to do this, some of the lawyers within that legal department may have really strong preferences. So benchmarking, you know, you might get the best benchmarking you think, and a lot of the time that may not cut the deal because of whatever other issues or relationships or concerns are at play. But all of these techniques are great. But I think that you have to sort of take it a little bit further than that and really talk about, you know, fixed cost, variable cost, you know, get into those difficult discussions with your supplier. And then we have the win-win, which is really not agreeing on some price that we can both live with and maybe neither of us are happy with, but it's really that relationship where you can find out what the true win-win scenario would be. And it's one of those things that it takes time because, like I said, I recommend for those some of these Kaizen events or some of other, you know, techniques that you can use through Lean, like the 5 whys, etc. But yeah, I think, I don't know whether it was Einstein or Abraham Lincoln or someone way smarter than me said that when you have a problem to solve, you really should spend about, you know, 80% or 90% of the time trying to figure out what the solution is, and then the rest executing it. So giving time to a lot of these things at the beginning and thinking of the win-win pie, not as one pie and not as a price pie, but as many other things, is a good way to do it. So these are some of the methodologies and tools that I mentioned. I didn't know that I was going to have time to go through all of them, and I may not. But again, taking costs out of the supply chain, you can use a Kaizen event. And through that, you can, I highlight here some of the techniques that you can use: brainstorming, 5 whys, etc., creating a current state map, and then visualize what types of waste are in the process, and then eliminating them. That's one of them. With the results, you know, it's always fascinating to me after we do one of these Kaizen events, and I do call them sort of like baby steps in innovation. You don't take everything at once. You figure out one particular vendor or one particular exercise with, you know, a law firm panel, and then you tackle that one issue. So you can really figure out a lot of the things that you need to do. You may find that the same question is being asked repeatedly of the same firms, for example, if you're talking about law firms. So you're paying for the same thing over and over again. So you may determine that you need to develop knowledge management internally. You know, do a Q&A, tab in your intranet with the answers, request your law firms to develop knowledge management. I don't think a lot of law firms are being asked to do that. Some of them are doing it, but that is a great if you have that kind of leverage to not only develop your own KM, but if you use law firms repeatedly, have them do it. And then you may have, you may find that the law firm you hired has, very poor ways of staffing cases, and you need to update your outside counsel manual. You need to request them to use technology. You need to sort of communicate your value proposition to the client. All of these things can be the result of a well-executed Kaizen event on one particular pain point, for example, managing outside counsel spend. So it's all very, it sounds amorphous, but it's really can be done very practically. And the results can be really phenomenal. And this is sort of this question that I have here, asking does not make you weaker in negotiation, and arrogance is our biggest enemy. Again, learn from your supplier. They know the business better because that's what they do day in and day out. I mentioned this already for RFPs. Ask for 2 responses or 3 in my case. Tell me exactly what I have asked for. Tell me what I should have asked for. And I would add to that, tell me what I'm asking for that you don't think is necessary. And to prevent contract excursions, I have another methodology here called the Demac, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, and control a process. You can use this particular tool for your contract negotiations. And I'm running out of time here. So if we want to stop and get some questions, I'll be happy to. But that is sort of, as you can see, when the slides become available to you, if they're not available to you, I sort of provide some of the different tools that you can use for some of these 4 buckets of procurement that are challenging. And I thought, they're very easily the subject of Lean Six Sigma process improvement exercise.